63-year-old Beatrice Halloway was invisible. To the new residents, she was just the slow, trembling woman who stocked the gauze, a liability they were trying to force into retirement. They called her too old for the trauma ward. They said her hands shook too much. They didn't know those hands had once held a dying platoon together in a basement in Iraq. They didn't know why she flinched at the sound of a helicopter, and they certainly didn't expect a decorated 4-star general to land on the hospital roof, storm into the ER, and salute the janitor, calling her by a name that didn't exist in HR files, the Surgeon of Fallujah. Beatrice Halloway checked the inventory list on her clipboard for the 3rd time, her glasses sliding down the bridge of her nose. The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's Trauma Center hummed with a frequency that seemed to burrow right into her skull. "Beatrice, move. You're blocking the crash cart." The voice was sharp, clipped, and devoid of patience. It belonged to Dr. Aris Pendergast, the 32-year-old chief resident, who wore his stethoscope like a chain of office. He brushed past her, his shoulder checking hers just hard enough to send her pen clattering to the floor. "Sorry, Doctor," Beatrice murmured, stooping to pick it up. Her knees popped audibly. "We need speed in this unit, Beatrice, not apologies," Pendergast snapped, not looking back as he typed furiously into a tablet. "I've already spoken to administration. If you can't keep up with the rotation during a standard Tuesday, I shudder to think what you'll do if we have a mass casualty. Maybe it's time to look at the hospice wing. Or the gift shop." A ripple of snickers went through the cluster of young interns standing by the nurses' station. They looked at Beatrice with a mixture of pity and annoyance. To them, she was a relic. She wore compression socks that bunched at the ankles and a cardigan over her scrubs because she was always cold. Her hair was a steel-grey bun that was never quite tight enough. She moved deliberately, lacking the frantic, caffeinated energy of the 20-somethings who sprinted from room to room. They called her Grandma Bia behind her back. They didn't know she spoke fluent Arabic. They didn't know she could insert a chest tube in the dark with nothing but a pocket knife and a ballpoint pen casing. They didn't know, because she had spent the last 20 years making sure no one found out. "Leave her alone, Pendergast," muttered Jessica, one of the few senior nurses who tolerated Beatrice. "She stocks the bays better than anyone. You never run out of EPI when she's on shift." "She's a liability," Pendergast hissed, lowering his voice but ensuring it still carried. "I watched her yesterday during the code in Bay 4. She froze, just stood there staring at the arterial spray like a deer in headlights. If I hadn't stepped in, that patient would have bled out. She's got PTSD written all over her, or early-onset dementia. Either way, she's out. I'm filing the final complaint tonight." Beatrice heard every word. She didn't freeze yesterday because she was scared. She froze because the patient, a young man with a gunshot wound to the neck, had looked exactly like Corporal Miller. November 2004. The basement of the rec center. The smell of wet concrete and iron. Beatrice shook her head, physically dispelling the memory. She gripped the clipboard tighter, her knuckles white. "Just do the job, B," she whispered to herself. "Pay the rent. Feed the cat. Go home." The intercom crackled to life, the voice of the dispatch operator urgent and shrill. "Code black. Code black. Level 1 trauma inbound. Multiple vehicles. VIP transport involved. ETA 4 minutes. All attending to the bay. Repeat, all attending to the bay." The atmosphere in the ER shifted instantly. Controlled chaos took over. Pendergast began barking orders, his eyes lighting up with the adrenaline of a high-stakes case. "All right, people, listen up. We have a high-priority collision. Secret Service detail involved. I want the trauma bays cleared. You, and you, prep OR 1 and 2. He spun around and pointed a long finger directly at Beatrice. "And Halloway, stay out of the way. Go organize the supply closet in the back. If I see you in the trauma bay, you're fired on the spot. Do you understand?" Beatrice looked at him. For a second, her dull grey eyes sharpened, a flicker of something cold and dangerous passing behind the iris. It was the look of a predator watching a child play with a loaded gun. But it vanished as quickly as it came. "Yes, Doctor," she said softly. She turned and walked towards the supply closet, her heart hammering a rhythm she hadn't felt since the siege. She knew that rhythm. It wasn't fear, it was the drumbeat of war. The supply closet was quiet, smelling of rubbing alcohol and cardboard. Beatrice began counting boxes of saline, her hands moving automatically. 1, 2, 3. Outside, the wail of sirens grew deafening. The roar of a helicopter engine shook the building, vibrating the shelves. 4, 5, 6. "Dust off," she whispered, the military term slipping out before she could catch it. The sound of the rotors was distinct, not a standard medevac. That was a Black Hawk. She closed her eyes. 2004. Fallujah. The city of mosques. She wasn't Beatrice then. She was Lieutenant B. Halloway, a trauma nurse attached to the 1st Marine Division. But the forward operating base, FOB, had been overrun. The doctors were dead. The surgeon, Major Kincaid, had taken a sniper round through the eye in the first 10 minutes. They were cut off, trapped in a bombed-out structure designated Hell House. 40 Marines, 20 critical. No evac. No surgeon. Only B. "Lieutenant!" The scream had come from a kid. Private First Class Rodriguez. "He's choking! His throat is crushed!" B had looked at the devastation. She had looked at her hands, covered in the dust of pulverized drywall and the blood of boys who hadn't even started shaving yet. She had taken a breath that tasted of cordite. "Give me the scalpel," she had said. Her voice hadn't trembled then. "But Mom, you're a nurse. You can't." "I said, give me the goddamn blade, Marine." She had cut, and she hadn't stopped cutting for 72 hours. Amputations, thoracotomies, tracheotomies. She stitched flesh with fishing line when the sutures ran out. She cauterized stumps with heated metal. She became a butcher to save the sheep. When the Special Forces team finally broke through the perimeter 3 days later to extract them, they found her covered in blood that had dried black, asleep sitting up against a wall, a scalpel still gripped in her hand. The floor was slick, but 18 Marines were alive who should have been dead. The colonel of the extracting unit had looked at the survivors, then at the carnage, then at the sleeping nurse. "Who did this?" he had asked the sergeant. "She did, sir," the sergeant had rasped. "The Surgeon of Fallujah." Beatrice opened her eyes in the supply closet. Her hands were shaking. They always shook when she remembered the sounds, the wet tearing sound. Suddenly the door to the supply closet burst open. It was Jessica, her face pale. "B, we need hands. It's a massacre out there. 2 SUVs rolled. Multiple traumas. Pendergast is overwhelmed." "He told me to stay here," Beatrice said, her voice flat. "To hell with Pendergast. We have a patient crashing in Bay 2, and the other doctors are busy with the VIP. He's got a tension pneumothorax, and nobody can get the tube in because of the facial trauma. He's drowning in his own blood, B." Beatrice hesitated. The rule was simple. Stay invisible. Stay safe. "Please," Jessica begged. "He's just a kid." Just a kid. That was the trigger. Beatrice dropped the box of saline. She didn't run. Running panic. She moved with a terrifyingly efficient swiftness, shedding the cardigan as she walked. She snapped a pair of gloves from the wall dispenser without breaking stride. When she entered the trauma bay, it was pandemonium. Pendergast was screaming at a nurse in Bay 1, where a man in a suit lay groaning. But in Bay 2, a young man, a driver, judging by the uniform, was thrashing, his face a ruin of glass and blood, his chest heaving uselessly. 2 interns were trying to restrain him. "His stats are dropping. 70 over 40. O2 sat is 60. Beatrice stepped up to the table. She didn't look at the monitors. She looked at the patient. She saw the deviation of the trachea. She saw the distended neck veins. "Scalpel," she said. It wasn't a question. The intern blinked. "What? You can't—" "Scalpel. 10 blade. Now." Her voice dropped an octave, cutting through the noise like a whip. It was the voice of the lieutenant. The intern, terrified, handed it to her. Beatrice didn't hesitate. She palpated the ribs, found the intercostal space, and sliced. A hiss of escaping air whistled out, followed by a spray of blood. The patient gasped, a ragged, beautiful sound of air filling a collapsed lung. "Chest tube," she commanded. She grabbed the tube, inserted it with a brutal, practiced shove, and secured it. The monitors began to beep a rising tone. 80%, 85%, 90%. Silence fell over Bay 2. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Pendergast was standing there. He had left the VIP to investigate the silence. His face was purple with rage. "You just performed an invasive surgical procedure without authorization. You are a nurse. You are finished, Holloway. Get out. Security." Beatrice stood there, her gloves bloody, the adrenaline fading into the familiar, cold ache of shame. She had broken cover. "He was dying," she said quietly. "I don't care if he was the Pope," Pendergast roared, stepping into her personal space. "You practiced medicine without a license. That is assault. That is a felony. I am pressing charges personally." The doors to the ER slid open with a pneumatic hiss. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, son." The voice was gravel and old bourbon. It commanded attention not by volume, but by weight. Every head turned. Standing in the entrance were 4 men in black tactical gear, flanking an older man in a crisp army service uniform. 4 stars on his shoulder. A chest full of ribbons that looked like a fruit salad made of heroism. He leaned on a cane, but he stood like a mountain. General Thomas Bulldog Rower, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Legend. Pendergast's jaw dropped. He stammered, smoothing his scrubs. "General Rower, sir, we are taking care of your detail. The VIP is stable. I was just dealing with a rogue employee." General Rower didn't even look at Pendergast. His steel blue eyes were fixed on the small, grey-haired woman standing by the crash cart, her hands dripping with blood. The general began to walk. The sound of his cane hitting the linoleum was the only sound in the room. Click, step, click, step. He walked past the doctors. He walked past the awe-struck residents. He stopped 3 feet from Beatrice. Beatrice looked down at her shoes. She wanted the floor to swallow her. She hadn't seen Tom Rower in 20 years, not since she loaded him onto a chopper with his leg hanging by a thread. "I've been looking for you for a long time, Lieutenant," Rower said softly. Pendergast laughed nervously. "Sir, I think there's a mistake. This is Beatrice. She's just a geriatric nurse. We were just about to have her arrested for—" "Shut up," Rower said. He didn't shout. He just stated it as a fact of nature. Pendergast clicked his mouth shut. Rower looked at Beatrice. Slowly, painfully, the old general let go of his cane. It clattered to the floor. He straightened his back, ignoring the agony in his hip, and raised a trembling hand to his brow. A perfect, sharp salute. "General, please," Beatrice whispered, tears leaking from her eyes. "Don't." 10 men in my unit made it home to their wives. Because of you, Rower said, his voice thickening with emotion. He lowered his hand but didn't look away. "Gentlemen," he addressed the room, his voice booming now, "you might know her as the woman who stocks your shelves. But in the sandbox, the Marines called her something else." He looked Pendergast dead in the eye. "You are standing in the presence of the Surgeon of Fallujah. And you will show her some goddamn respect." The silence in the trauma bay was heavy, suffocating. But for Beatrice, the pristine white tiles of St. Jude's were dissolving. The sterile smell of disinfectant was replaced by the copper tang of blood and the acrid stench of burning rubber. General Rower's voice had been the key, unlocking a door she had bolted shut 20 years ago. She wasn't in the hospital anymore. She was back in the Hell House. November 12th, 2004, Fallujah, Iraq. The building had once been a rec center for local youth. Now, it was a tomb with 3 walls. The roof had partially collapsed during the initial mortar barrage, leaving the interior exposed to the grey, weeping sky of the city. Inside, it was a slaughterhouse. "Pressure! I need more pressure!" Beatrice screamed, her hands slick with blood that wasn't hers. She was kneeling in a pool of muck, a mixture of mud, oil, and human fluids. Beside her lay Major Kincaid, the unit's head surgeon. He was gone, his eyes staring unseeingly at the exposed rebar in the ceiling, a sniper's bullet having found the gap in his Kevlar vest. That left her, Lieutenant Beatrice Halloway, a nurse with 6 months of field experience. Around her, 30 Marines lay in various states of devastation. They were the remnants of Charlie Company, pinned down by insurgent fire from the minarets to the east. The radio was dead. The medevac was grounded due to a sandstorm that was turning the world orange. "Lieutenant, we're losing the colonel." It was Corporal Miller. He was 18, from Ohio, with freckles that stood out against the grime on his face. He was dragging a heavy body across the debris-strewn floor. Beatrice scrambled over on her hands and knees. The man they were dragging was a giant, Colonel Thomas Rower. A mortar round had landed 5 feet from him. His right leg was a ruin. The femur was shattered, the artery compromised, the flesh flayed open from hip to knee. Rower was conscious, but barely. His face was grey. He looked at Beatrice, his eyes glazing over. "Leave me, Lieutenant!" he rasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "Triage protocols, save the ones who can fight." "Shut up, sir!" Beatrice snapped. She ripped open her medical kit. It was pitifully empty. 2 syrettes of morphine, 1 roll of gauze, no clamps, no sutures. "Miller, give me your belt," she ordered. "Ma'am, the belt, now!" She took the heavy canvas web belt and cranked it around Rower's thigh, creating a makeshift tourniquet. The bleeding slowed, but the leg was a mangled mess of dead tissue. Gangrene would set in within hours in this filth. If she didn't clean it, stabilize the bone, and close the wound, he would die of sepsis before the storm cleared. But she had no surgeon. She had no operating theatre. She had a pocket knife and a bottle of vodka Miller had looted from an abandoned hotel. Beatrice looked at the colonel's leg. She looked at the dead surgeon. "You can't do this," a voice whispered in her head. "You're a nurse. You administer meds. You change dressings. You don't reconstruct limbs." Then Rower groaned, a sound of pure agony. Beatrice's face hardened. She poured the vodka over her hands. Then she poured it over the pocket knife. "Miller, sit on his chest. Rodriguez, hold his good leg. Do not let him move." "What are you going to do, ma'am?" Miller asked, his voice trembling. "I'm going to be a surgeon," she whispered. For the next 4 hours, Beatrice Halloway worked in a fugue state. Without anesthesia, she cut away the necrotic flesh. She located the bleeders and tied them off, using threads pulled from her own uniform. When she needed to set the bone, she used the barrel of a broken M16 as a splint, lashing it tight with parachute cord. Rower screamed until he passed out. Then he woke up and screamed again. But she didn't stop. When she finished with Rower, she moved to the next man, a sucking chest wound. She used the plastic wrapper from an MRE, meal ready to eat, to seal the hole, taping it down on 3 sides to create a flutter valve. Next, a shrapnel wound to the neck. She heated the tip of her knife with a lighter until it glowed cherry red and cauterized the vein, the smell of cooking meat making Miller retch in the corner. She didn't eat. She didn't drink. She didn't sleep. By the 2nd day, the Marines started looking at her differently. They stopped calling her Lieutenant or Ma'am. "Hey, surgeon," a lance corporal whispered, holding out a canteen of dirty water. "Drink this." "I'm not a surgeon," she mumbled, her eyes burning. "You are to us," he said. On the 3rd day, the insurgents breached the ground floor. Gunfire erupted downstairs. Beatrice was on the 2nd floor with the critical patients. She had a 9mm pistol on her hip that she had never fired. She heard boots on the stairs. She drew the weapon, her hands shaking from exhaustion. She stood in front of Rower and the others, shielding them with her small body. "Get back!" she screamed at the shadow in the doorway. Friendly! Friendly! It was a Navy SEAL, the extraction team. The SEAL lowered his weapon, looking around the room. He saw 20 men who should have been dead. He saw the improvised stitches, the MRE wrappers, the gun barrel splints. And he saw the small woman with greying hair and wild eyes, holding a pistol with a grip so tight her knuckles were white. "Jesus," the SEAL breathed. "Who's the doc?" Roa, who had regained consciousness, lifted his head. He pointed a trembling finger at Beatrice. "She is. Present day. St. Jude's Hospital." The flashback receded, leaving Beatrice gasping for air in the bright, harsh light of the ER. She was back. She was 63. She was tired. General Roa was still standing there, his hand slowly lowering from the salute. The ER was paralyzed. Nurses were frozen mid-stride. Patients in the waiting area were craning their necks. Dr. Aris Pendergast was the first to break the spell. His ego, bruised and battered, scrambled to regain control of the narrative. "This is preposterous," Pendergast sputtered, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "General Roa, with all due respect, I believe you are mistaken. This woman is an LPN, a licensed practical nurse. Her file is clear. She has no surgical residency, no board certification. If she performed surgery in Iraq, that's a war crime, isn't it? Practicing without a license?" The audacity of the statement sucked the air out of the room. Jessica, the head nurse, gasped audibly. Roa turned his head slowly, like a tank turret traversing to lock onto a new target. He looked at Pendergast with an expression of profound disgust. "A war crime?" Roa repeated, his voice dangerously low. "Son, in that basement the only law was survival. And she was the law." "That's very touching, really," Pendergast said, his voice rising, gaining confidence as he fell back on bureaucracy. "But we are not in a basement in Fallujah. We are in a Tier 1 trauma center in the United States of America. And here, the law is clear. She just performed a thoracostomy on a patient without authorization. That is assault. That is grounds for immediate termination and legal action. I don't care if she stitched up Napoleon Bonaparte. She is a liability to this hospital today." Pendergast turned to the security guards, who had drifted closer. "Escort Miss Halloway off the premises. I'm suspending her pending a full board review." "You can't do that," Jessica shouted, stepping forward. "She saved that boy's life. You were too busy kissing up to the VIP to notice he was dying." "Security!" Pendergast shrieked. 2 guards stepped toward Beatrice. She shrank back, her shoulders slumping. The warrior of Fallujah was gone. The tired old woman had returned. She began to untie her scrubs. "It's okay," Beatrice whispered. "I'll go." "She isn't going anywhere," Roa boomed. He stepped between Beatrice and the guards. He didn't raise a hand, but the guards stopped dead in their tracks. "You didn't walk through a 4-star general." "If she leaves," Roa said, addressing the room but looking at the hospital cameras, "then I leave, and I'm taking my detail with me, and I will personally call every news outlet in the city, hell, in the country, and tell them that St. Jude's fires heroes for saving lives while their doctors play politics." The doors to the ER whooshed open again. This time it wasn't soldiers. It was suits. Hospital Administrator Marcus Sterling strode in, looking flushed. He had clearly been watching the security feed. "General Roa," Sterling said, his voice dripping with oil. "Please, there is no need for this. Dr. Pendergast is passionate, but perhaps hasty." "Hasty?" Pendergast cried. "She stabbed a patient with a scalpel." "She performed a life-saving intervention," Roa countered. "I saw the kid. He's breathing. He's stable. If she hadn't acted, he'd be a corpse by now. Is that your policy, mister? Sterling? Let them die if the paperwork isn't right." Sterling looked trapped. He looked at the general, then at the fuming chief resident, and finally at Beatrice, who looked like she wanted to dissolve into the floor. "We will conduct an internal review," Sterling said diplomatically. "Beatrice, why don't you take the rest of the week off? Paid leave, until things cool down." "She's fired," Pendergast insisted. "Quiet, Aris. Sterling snapped. He turned to the general. "Sir, we would be honored to treat you. Please, come this way." Roa didn't move. He turned to Beatrice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. "I didn't just come here for my hip, B," Roa said softly. "I came because the files were finally declassified. The Pentagon released the records of Hell House last week." Beatrice's eyes widened. "No," she whispered. "Thomas, please. Don't." "The world needs to know," Roa said. He opened the box. Inside lay the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor. "They wouldn't give it to you back then because you were just a nurse, and the officers were embarrassed that a woman saved their asses," Roa said, his voice trembling with old anger. "But I fought them. For 20 years I fought them. It's yours, B." The room was silent. Even Pendergast was staring at the medal. Beatrice looked at the cross. It was heavy. It was beautiful. And it terrified her. "I can't take it," she said, her voice shaking. "I just did my job. I just didn't want them to die alone." "Beatrice Halloway," Roa said formally, "you are the Surgeon of Fallujah. You don't get to hide anymore." Suddenly, a flash of light blinded them. Beatrice blinked. Through the glass doors of the ER waiting room, she saw them. The press. The local news vans had arrived for the car crash, but they had seen the general. They had seen the confrontation. Phones were raised against the glass, recording everything. Beatrice felt the walls closing in. She had spent 20 years being invisible. Now, she was the center of the universe. Pendergast saw the cameras, too. A nasty, calculating sneer curled his lip. He realized he couldn't win a shouting match with a general, but he could win a legal one. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick text to a contact at the State Nursing Board. "Subject, immediate suspension, unlicensed practice, gross negligence. I have a witness." He looked up at Beatrice, his eyes cold. "You might have a medal," his expression said, "but I have the law, and I'm going to destroy you." "Take the week, Beatrice," Pendergast said smoothly, his voice changing to a mock-caring tone for the benefit of the administrator. "Rest up. You'll need it for the hearing." Beatrice looked at Roa, then at Pendergast. She took off her badge and placed it on the counter. "I'm not coming back," she said. She turned and walked out the automatic doors, past the cameras, into the cold night air. Roa shouted after her, but she didn't stop. She needed to run. But for the first time in 20 years, she wasn't running away from her past. She was running toward a fight she wasn't sure she could win. The morning after the incident, Beatrice Halloway woke up to the sound of news helicopters hovering over her small suburban bungalow. She hadn't slept. She had spent the night sitting in her rocking chair, staring at the empty space on her mantel where a family photo should have been. She had no family. The Marines were her family, and she had left them in the desert 20 years ago. She turned on the TV. It was a mistake. Questions swirling around St. Jude's Hospital today after a violent confrontation in the ER, a polished anchorwoman said, a graphic reading "Rogue Nurse" or "Hidden Hero" flashing behind her. Dr. Aris Pendergast, chief resident, alleges that 63-year-old nurse Beatrice Halloway performed an unauthorized, brutal surgical procedure on a car crash victim, risking his life. Sources say Halloway has a history of insubordination. The screen cut to Pendergast. He looked immaculate in a white coat, standing outside the hospital. "It's tragic, really," Pendergast said to the cameras, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Dementia is a cruel disease. Miss Halloway believes she is a war hero. She believes she is a surgeon. But the reality is, she is a danger to herself and her patients. We are looking into her past, and what we are finding is disturbing." Beatrice turned the TV off. Her hands were shaking again. "They're going to bury me," she whispered. A knock at the door made her jump. It wasn't a polite knock. It was 3 hard raps. She opened it to find General Thomas Bulldog Roa standing on her porch. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood 5 men. They were middle-aged, some balding, some with limps. but they stood in a formation that Beatrice recognized instantly. "Permission to come aboard, Lieutenant," Roa grunted. Beatrice covered her mouth, a sob escaping. She recognized them. There was Corporal Miller, now a chubby real estate agent from Ohio. There was Rodriguez, now a mechanic with a prosthetic arm. There was a Ghost, the sniper who had lost an eye, now wearing an eye patch and a suit. "You boys," Beatrice choked out. "We saw the news," Miller said, his voice thick. "We saw that little punk talking about you. The general called us. We're here for the hearing, B," Rodriguez said. "We're not leaving you behind this time." Roa stepped inside, his face grim. "It's worse than you think, B. Pendergast isn't just trying to fire you. He's digging up the 04 incident, the official report." Beatrice froze. The blood drained from her face. "The report says Major Kincaid did the surgeries before he died," she whispered. "The command, they lied. To protect the Corps. They couldn't admit a female nurse commanded a battalion and performed surgery for 3 days." "Exactly," Roa said. "Pendergast has the official logs. He's going to use them to prove you're a liar. He's going to say you're stealing valor. He's going to say you're insane." "Then let him," Beatrice said, her voice hollow. "I can't fight the U.S. Army records, Tom. I'm just a nurse." Roa slammed his cane down on her floor. "You are the Surgeon of Fallujah," he roared, startling the other men. "And I didn't drive 6 hours on a shattered hip to watch you surrender. We have a weapon he doesn't know about." Roa pulled a small, rusted, digital voice recorder from his pocket. It was an old Sony model, taped together with duct tape. "Rodriguez found this in his attic," Roa said, a feral grin spreading across his face. "I had it rolling during the siege. It has audio, B. It has everything." The disciplinary hearing was held in the hospital's boardroom, a glass-walled aquarium of judgment. The room was packed. The hospital administrator, Marcus Sterling, sat at the head of the table, looking like a man who wanted to be anywhere else. On one side sat Pendergast, flanked by 2 high-priced hospital lawyers. On the other sat Beatrice, wearing her best Sunday dress, looking small and frail. Behind her, however, sat General Roa and the 5 survivors of Hell House, their arms crossed, staring holes into the back of Pendergast's head. Pendergast stood up, buttoning his jacket. He didn't look at the soldiers. He looked at the board. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pendergast began, his voice smooth, "we are here to discuss a tragic case of mental decline. Miss Holloway claims she performed life-saving surgery in Fallujah in 2004. She uses this delusion to justify assaulting a patient in my ER." He picked up a thick file and dropped it on the table with a heavy thud. "This is the official declassified after-action report for the incident at the rec center," Pendergast said, tapping the file. "It states clearly that Major Medical Officer William Kincaid performed 17 surgeries before succumbing to his wounds. It states that Lieutenant Holloway merely assisted with hydration and bandage replacement." Pendergast looked at Beatrice with a sneer. "Assisted with hydration. You changed water bottles, Beatrice. You didn't save anyone." A murmur went through the room. The board members looked at Beatrice with pity. "Furthermore," Pendergast continued, his eyes gleaming with a strange, personal intensity, "I have a personal interest in this. You see, Major William Kincaid was my father." The room gasped. Beatrice looked up, shock registering in her eyes. "That's right," Pendergast hissed. "I changed my name to my mother's maiden name when I started medical school to avoid favoritism. But I grew up hearing about my father's heroism, how he operated while dying. And now, this nurse dares to steal his legacy, dares to claim she did his work." He pointed a shaking finger at her. "You are a liar, Miss Holloway. You are a fraud, and you have disgraced the memory of a great man." The silence was absolute. It was a devastating blow. Pendergast wasn't just a bureaucrat. He was a grieving son defending his father. The narrative had flipped. Beatrice was the villain. Administrator Sterling looked at Beatrice. "Miss Holloway, do you have anything to say?" Beatrice stood up. Her knees shook, but she didn't hold the table for support. She looked at Pendergast, really looked at him, and saw the pain behind his arrogance. "Your father," Beatrice said softly, "was a good man, Aris. He was kind. He let me suture small wounds when the other doctors told me to stick to bedpans." "Don't you talk about him," Pendergast snapped. "But he didn't do those surgeries," Beatrice said, her voice gaining strength. "He died 10 minutes into the attack. A sniper round. Instantaneous. He never suffered." "Liar!" Pendergast screamed. "The report says—" "The report is a lie." General Rower's voice boomed from the back of the room. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "The command wrote that report because they couldn't handle the truth. They couldn't handle that the hero doctor died and the girl nurse saved the day." "This is hearsay," Pendergast's lawyer shouted. "Unless you have proof that contradicts the official U.S. Army record, this hearing is over." Rower smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Rodriguez," Rower said, "play it." The one-armed mechanic stood up and placed the old Sony recorder on the center of the mahogany table. He pressed play. For a moment, there was only the hiss of static, then the sound of explosions, the screaming of men, and then a voice, clear as a bell. "Lieutenant, he's choking! The colonel is dying!" That was Rodriguez's voice, young and terrified. Then a woman's voice, calm, steel. "Give me the scalpel." "But ma'am, Major Kincaid is dead." "You can't," I said. "Give me the goddamn blade, Marine." "Miller, hold the flashlight. I'm going in." The recording continued. It went on for minutes, the sounds of sawing, the wet, tearing sounds of surgery, and through it all, Beatrice's voice, commanding, teaching, comforting. "Easy, Colonel, I've got the artery. You're not dying today. Not on my watch." "Good cut, B, good cut," a dying soldier whispered on the tape. The recording ended with a click. Pendergast stood frozen. His face was ashen. He looked at the recorder, then at Beatrice. The truth was in the audio. His father hadn't saved them. She had. That could be fake," Pendergast stammered. But his voice lacked all conviction. "Deep fake. AI." "It's from 2004, son," Rower said gently. "Analog tape. You can't fake that." Rower turned to the administrator. "The Pentagon has already authenticated this. I sent it to them this morning. They are correcting the record as we speak. Major Kincaid will be awarded the Purple Heart, but the Navy Cross? That belongs to her." Pendergast sank into his chair. He looked like a child who had just learned Santa Claus wasn't real. "But," Pendergast whispered, "if my father didn't do it, then who am I?" Beatrice walked over to him. She didn't gloat. She didn't yell. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are a doctor, Aris," she said kindly, "and you're a damn good one. But you need to learn that titles don't save lives. Hands do, and hearts do." The silence in the boardroom following the end of the tape was heavier than the lead aprons used in radiology. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. The recording of Beatrice's voice, younger, steelier, commanding men to cut and stitch amidst the roar of mortars, hung in the air, ghost-like. Dr. Aris Pendergast sat slumped in his ergonomic leather chair, a man physically deconstructed. The tape hadn't just proven Beatrice's innocence, it had dismantled the foundational myth of his life. His father, Major Kincaid, was a hero, yes, but he wasn't the surgeon. He hadn't spent 3 days saving lives in a basement. He had died instantly. The hands Aris had idolized, the hands he had tried so desperately to emulate, had been cold for 20 years. The hands that had actually done the work were currently resting on the mahogany table, wrinkled and trembling slightly, belonging to the woman he had tried to fire. Administrator Sterling cleared his throat, the sound incredibly loud. "Well," he began, his voice lacking its usual polish, "I believe the board has heard enough. The charges of gross negligence are evidently unsubstantiated." Pendergast didn't respond. He was staring at the table, his eyes wet and unfocused. "I didn't know," he whispered, his voice cracking. "My mother. She never told me. She just said he was a hero. Beatrice looked at him. The anger she had felt days ago had evaporated, replaced by a weary sadness. She saw the boy inside the doctor. "She gave you a good memory, Aris," Beatrice said softly. "Don't hate her for that." Before Pendergast could answer, the heavy double doors of the boardroom were thrown open with a violence that made everyone jump. Jessica, the head ER nurse, stood in the frame. She was breathless, her scrubs splattered with fresh, bright arterial blood. Her eyes were wide with panic. "We need a surgeon, now!" she screamed, ignoring the board members. "It's the kid, the driver from the pile-up. His chest tube clotted off. He's tensioning. We've lost a pulse." Sterling stood up, knocking his water glass over. "Page the on-call. Page Trauma 2. "Trauma 2 is in a Whipple," Jessica yelled back, her voice bordering on hysteria. "Trauma 1 is scrubbing in on the VIP. There's no one else. He's going to die in the next 2 minutes." The room turned to Pendergast. He was the chief resident. He was the best surgeon in the building. "Dr. Pendergast," Sterling barked. "Go, now!" Pendergast looked up, but his eyes were empty. The shock of the last 10 minutes had severed the connection between his brain and his hands. He looked at his shaking fingers. "I can't," he stammered. "I'm suspended. The investigation—" "To hell with the investigation!" Sterling shouted. "Save the patient!" "I can't," Pendergast choked out, burying his face in his hands. "I'm not him. I'm not my father." The room froze. The patient was dying downstairs, and the only surgeon available was paralyzed by an identity crisis. Then a chair scraped back against the floor, a sharp, deliberate sound. Beatrice Halloway stood up. She didn't look frail anymore. She didn't look like Grandma B. She reached into a purse, pulled out a black hair tie, and in 3 swift motions, bound her grey hair into a tight, severe bun. She kicked off her sensible nursing shoes, standing in her socks. "General," she said, her voice dropping that terrifying octave, returning to the tone on the tape. "Door." General Rower, leaning on his cane, grinned. "Yes, ma'am." He used his cane to hold the door open. Beatrice walked over to Pendergast. She didn't comfort him. She grabbed him by the lapels of his expensive suit and hauled him to his feet with a strength that belied her age. "Snap out of it, Marine," she barked, her face inches from his. Pendergast blinked, shocked. "What? You want to honor your father?" she hissed. "Then do what he would have done if the bullet hadn't hit him. Get your ass to the bay." "But I can't do it alone," Pendergast whispered, terror in his eyes. "You're not alone," Beatrice said, releasing him and shoving him toward the door. "I'm scrubbing in." She turned to the stunned administrator. "Get out of my way, Sterling. If you speak, I'll have the general court-martial you." She ran, and Pendergast, propelled by a mixture of fear and awe, ran after her. The scene in Trauma Bay 1 was a circle of hell. Monitors were screaming the flatline tone, a continuous, piercing whine that grated on the nerves. The young driver lay on the table, his chest distended, his face turning a deep, bruised purple. Nurses were taking turns doing compressions, but it was useless against the pressure building in his chest. "Move!" Beatrice shouted as she burst through the doors. The team parted like the Red Sea. They expected Pendergast to take the lead, but it was Beatrice who stepped up to the table. She didn't wait for a gown. She snapped on sterile gloves with a sharp thwack. "Scalpel," she ordered. She didn't look to see if they obeyed. She knew they would. A nurse slapped the handle into her palm. "Pendergast, get opposite me," she commanded. "We need to reopen the thoracostomy and clamp the bleeder. He's drowning in his own blood." Pendergast stood frozen at the foot of the bed, staring at the monitor. "Asystole. Dr. Pendergast," Beatrice shouted, using his full title. "I need hands, now!" Her voice cut through his paralysis. It was the voice of authority. He scrambled to the side of the bed, grabbing a retractor. "Make the incision," Pendergast said, his voice trembling. "Already done," Beatrice said calmly. She had sliced through the previous sutures in one fluid motion. Blood welled up, dark and angry. Spread the ribs wider. Don't be gentle, Aris. He's dying." Pendergast cranked the retractor. There was a sickening crack of cartilage, but the chest cavity opened. "I can't see the source!" Pendergast panicked, looking into the mess of blood and tissue. "There's too much blood. Suction," Beatrice ordered the nurse, then looked at Pendergast. "Look with your fingers, not your eyes. Feel the flow." She grabbed Pendergast's gloved hand and plunged it into the patient's chest. Pendergast gasped, but Beatrice held his wrist firm. "Feel that?" she whispered intensely. "Posterior aspect. Intercostal artery. It's pulsing against your finger." Pendergast's eyes widened. He felt it. A hot, rhythmic jet of blood. "I feel it." "Clamp it," she said. "Here." She slapped a hemostat into his free hand. "Blind clamp. You have to trust your hands, Aris. Do it." Pendergast hesitated. If he missed, he could crush the nerve bundle. He could kill the boy. "Do it!" Beatrice roared. Pendergast closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, visualizing the anatomy, and squeezed the clamp shut. Click. Beatrice watched the field. The welling of blood stopped instantly. "Bleeding controlled," she announced. "Restart compressions. Push one of EPI. Let's get him back." For the next 10 minutes, the trauma bay became a symphony conducted by Beatrice Halloway. She called out drug doses without looking at a chart. She directed the flow of oxygen. She managed the fluids. Pendergast worked alongside her, stitching, tying, and suctioning, moving to her rhythm. He wasn't the chief resident anymore. He was the resident, and she was the attending. "Come on," Beatrice whispered, staring at the monitor. "I didn't come this far to lose you." Beep, a jagged spike on the green line. Beep, beep. Sinus rhythm, Pendergast breathed, staring at the screen as if it were a miracle. "We have capture. Pressure is coming up. 90/60. The team slumped collectively, the adrenaline dumping out of their systems. Beatrice peeled off her blood-soaked gloves and dropped them into the biohazard bin. Her hands were steady. She turned to leave, but Pendergast caught her arm. The room went silent. The nurses, the interns, even the administrator who had crept into the back. They all watched. Pendergast looked at the woman he had called a liability. He saw the sweat on her brow, the blood on her arms, and the fierce intelligence in her eyes. He slowly unhooked his badge, the one that said Chief Resident, and held it in his hand. "You were right," Pendergast said, his voice thick with emotion, "about everything." "Aris, no," he interrupted. "My father didn't save those men. You did, and you just saved this boy. And you saved me." He looked around the room, ensuring everyone heard him. "Write up the op note," he told the charge nurse. "Primary surgeon, Halloway. Assistant, Pendergast." He looked back at her and straightened his posture, not as a superior, but as an equal. "Thank you, surgeon." 3 months later, the autumn wind swirled leaves around the entrance of St. Jude's Hospital. A small crowd had gathered by the East Wing entrance for a ceremony. Administrator Sterling, looking humbled, stood at a podium. "We often look for heroes in the headlines," he said into the microphone. "But sometimes they are stocking the shelves right beside us." He pulled a cord, unveiling a new bronze plaque bolted to the brickwork, the Beatrice Halloway Trauma Wing, dedicated to the unseen heroes of medicine. The crowd applauded. In the front row sat General Rower, wiping a tear from his eye. Beside him sat the Hell House survivors, Miller, Rodriguez, and the others, looking proud in their Sunday best. Beatrice stood by the podium. She wasn't wearing scrubs. She was wearing a navy blue blazer. Pinned to the lapel was the Navy Cross, its blue and white ribbon stark against the dark fabric. She stepped to the mic. She didn't give a long speech. She simply said, "Titles don't save lives. People do. Never underestimate the person standing next to you." Beatrice didn't retire to a quiet life of gardening. She accepted the position of Director of Nursing Education. Every Tuesday morning, a new crop of terrified interns and nursing students would gather in Auditorium B. They would whisper rumors about the grey-haired woman who walked with a slight limp. "I heard she performed surgery with a pocket knife." I heard she made the chief resident cry. I heard a general salutes her. Beatrice would walk in, carrying a stack of files. She would dump them on the desk and look at the young faces. "My name is Beatrice," she would start. "And in this class, we don't just learn how to start IVs. We learn how to lead when the lights go out. We learn how to be the calm in the center of the storm." After class, she would often go to the hospital cafeteria. Aris Pendergast, still the chief but a much humbler man, would join her. They would drink bad coffee and discuss cases. He asked her advice on difficult closures. She asked him about the latest robotic surgical tech. They were an odd pair, the young hotshot and the old warhorse, but they were the strongest team in the hospital. And every evening, before she went home to feed her cat, Beatrice would walk past the bronze plaque. She would touch the cool metal, not for vanity, but as a reminder. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't too old. She was Beatrice Halloway, the Surgeon of Fallujah, and she had work to do. And that is the full, incredible story of Beatrice Halloway, a reminder that heroism has no expiration date and that respect is earned in the trenches, not given by titles. If this finale gave you chills, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets us bring you more epic stories like this one. What did you think of Pendergast's redemption? Did he deserve a second chance? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight.